If you ever needed proof that late-night comedy can be more brutal than the British tabloids, look no further than Colin Jost's takedown of Prince Harry on Saturday Night Live. And no, this wasn't your average cheeky jab, it was a royal evisceration delivered with a straight face and surgical precision during SNL's Weekend Update segment. The joke wasn't just funny, it was devastating. And judging by the reaction online and in the press, it hit the Sussex camp right where it hurts their credibility. This wasn't just a punchline, it was a cultural moment. If you stood still watching, you clearly have thoughts. Drop sitpane below and hit subscribe for more no BS breakdowns. The moment a former prince turned podcaster realized he'd officially become a pop culture punchline. So how did we get here? How did Prince Harry, once a war hero and arguably the world's most eligible royal, become the target of one of the most biting comedic roasts of the year? And more importantly, how did he react? There was a time, feels like 100 royal scandals ago, when Prince Harry had the public firmly in his corner. He was the charming, slightly rebellious spare, the soldier, the brother with emotional depth. He walked behind his mother's casket, served in Afghanistan, and once famously said, "We do it for the guys who didn't come home." That Harry? People loved that guy. But fast forward to now, and that version of Harry feels like a relic. The modern iteration of Prince Harry lives in Montecito, drops bombshell memoirs, makes awkward appearances on US talk shows, and partners with Netflix to share his trauma in 4K resolution. Somewhere along the way, he went from quietly honorable to, well, extremely online. And comedians noticed. Enter Colin Jost. On Weekend Update, Jost delivered a line that felt less like a joke and more like a royal obituary. Prince Harry is officially the worst spare in royal history. And then, twisting the knife, he added, from palace to podcast, he lost his crown to an algorithm. Ouch. The brilliance of Jost's roast was how little it had to exaggerate. That's the danger zone in satire, when your real-life contradictions are already so loud. The jokes just have to echo them. Harry asked for privacy. Then he wrote Spare, a 400-page tell-all with anecdotes about frozen appendages and royal bedroom drama. He left behind royal duties. Then he signed up for streaming content deals that basically repackaged those duties into monetized trauma. And when he finally sat down on late-night couches to promote it all, it wasn't stoic or dignified, it was awkward. That's the paradox Jost was spotlighting. It wasn't just about Harry's choices, it was about the collapse of the narrative. When you brand yourself as the victim of toxic royalty and then turn that story into a full-blown media empire, people start to question the mission. Was it ever about healing, or was it about monetizing a very public family feud? The audience laughed not because they hate Harry, but because the disconnect is so glaring, it's absurd. The punchlines practically write themselves. ACT3, the reaction, not so royal. So how did Harry take it? Well, he didn't exactly post a reaction video, but sources close to him, yes, those infamous sources hinted that he felt blindsided by the tone, that he thought he had moved into the respected speaker phase of his public life, not the recurring SNL character era. And that might be the most revealing part. Because in Harry's mind, he's still the guy fighting for mental health awareness, trying to modernize royalty, trying to protect his wife and children from a cruel media machine. And maybe part of that is true. But when the majority of your public appearances revolve around your own story, the line between advocacy and attention-seeking starts to blur. And if there's one thing comedy can't resist, it's blurred lines and bloated egos. That's why the SNL roast felt so damning. It wasn't just a gag, it was a verdict. One delivered in real time, with millions watching. ACT4, the public turns. Now let's talk about the audience. Because public sentiment toward Harry and Meghan hasn't just shifted, it's whiplashed. At first, people were genuinely outraged on their behalf. The racism Meghan endured, The institutional coldness, the tabloid cruelty. It felt like a real-world fairy tale turned horror story. But over time something shifted, not because their message stopped being important, but because their method became exhausting. The endless interviews, the carefully staged vulnerability, the exclusive insights that felt less like healing and more like brand expansion. By the time the Netflix documentary dropped, a lot of viewers weren't crying. They were eye-rolling. And when Spare hit shelves with its bizarre overshares and family shade, people didn't feel closer to Harry, they felt weirder about him. It wasn't empathy anymore, it was second-hand cringe. And that's the perfect setup for comedy to swoop in and deliver the finishing blow. ACT 5, Satire as Social Reset. What Colin Jost did on SNL wasn't just funny, it was cultural shorthand. In a single segment, he managed to sum up a year's worth of disillusionment. He said what a lot of people were already thinking but hadn't put into words. That's the power of satire. It doesn't invent problems, it distills them. It takes public fatigue and wraps it in a joke so sharp it cuts through all the PR noise. And when that joke lands on SNL, it becomes more than just a punchline. It becomes a timestamp, a signal that the vibe has officially shifted. For Harry and Meghan, that sketch might have marked the unofficial expiration date on their current strategy. Because when the comedians stop clapping and start laughing at you, the audience tends to follow. ACT 6. Where do they go from here? So now what? For Harry, the path forward is murky. His military past, charitable work, and genuine advocacy for mental health still matter. But he's going to have to separate those things from his identity as a media brand. Because if every project, every appearance, every interview is just another variation of here's my trauma and why I'm still mad at my family, people are going to keep tuning out, or worse, tuning in just to laugh. And for Meghan, she's in a trickier spot. The lawsuit references and brand mishaps have already painted her as the mastermind behind the Sussex content machine. Fair or not, that's the perception. If they want to regain credibility, the rebrand can't be just about changing the format, it has to change the tone. Fewer monologues, more action. Less curated relatability, more authentic service. Ochi Ochi O, the mole of the meltdown. The SNL sketch wasn't just a viral moment, it was a cultural checkpoint. A sign that even fairy tales have a saturation point, and that when you chase relevance too hard, you might just catch ridicule instead. If Harry and Meghan want to bounce back, they'll have to do what they claim to want all along: step back, rebuild quietly, stop narrating every chapter before the ink dries. Because if they don't, the next roast won't come from a comedian, it'll come from history. And unlike SNL, that one doesn't do commercial breaks. ACT 7. The royal rebrand that never landed. Let's talk about the attempted rebrand. Because ever since Harry and Meghan touched down in the US, their entire public image has been under constant renovation. One week they're spiritual wellness gurus, the next they're startup investors, then they're docuseries protagonists, podcast hosts, memoirists, and public speakers. It's a lot. And that sips part of the problem. Because at some point, the message gets lost in the marketing. What do they actually stand for? What do they do? Strip away the titles, the trauma memoirs, and the Spotify flop, what's left? For a couple so determined to escape the rigid identity of the royal family, they've accidentally constructed an identity that's just as confining, only this time it's built on vibes, branding, and endless content rather than duty and tradition. It's not that the causes they claim to care about, mental health, equity, the media's role in society, aren't worthy. It's that their execution has become so intertwined with their personal grievances. It's hard to tell where the advocacy ends and the self-interest begins. And when public figures start looking more like personal brands than people, satire will always come knocking. ACT 8. The Spare of it all. Let's circle back to Spare for a moment, because that book really marked a turning point. The hype was enormous. A royal memoir by the Spare himself? People expected introspection, maybe even healing. Instead, they got frostbite jokes, dog bowl brawls, and a level of overshare that made even the most seasoned royal watchers go, "You know what? Maybe some family secrets should stay secret." By the time the world had finished digesting anecdotes about Ghost Diana and penis cream, the one thing no one was saying anymore was, "Wow, this guy seems really grounded." That's why Colin Jost's jab about Harry losing his crown to an algorithm hit so hard. Because that is what happened. The royal mystique was traded in for Netflix queues and podcast rankings, and now the very platform Harry used to amplify his truth has turned him into a meme. That's the risk of turning your personal story into public property. You lose the power to control how people interpret it. And when comedians start quoting you verbatim for laughs, you've officially entered self-parody territory. ACT 9. Why comedy hurts more than criticism. Here's the real kicker. Criticism you can dismiss. Call it the press being unfair. Blame the tabloids. Accuse them of twisting your words. But comedy's trickier. Because it works, because it's true enough to be funny. You can't clap back at a joke the way you can at an article. You can't sue a punchline. And when the audience laughs, you don't just lose the argument, you lose the room. That's what makes the SNL roast sting, in a way no Daily Mail headline ever could. It wasn't just mockery. It was a mirror, and it reflected everything Harry and Meghan have become in the public eye, whether they like it or not. It's the kind of moment that signals a cultural turning point, not just for the couple, but for the audience too. When people stop listening for truth and start waiting for the next meme, the storytelling power shifts permanently. ACT 10. Meghan Sep's role in the meltdown. Now let's not pretend Meghan's been sidelined in all of this. If anything, public scrutiny has been even harsher toward her, and that's a whole separate layer of the mess. She entered the scene as a groundbreaking figure, an American biracial actress marrying into British royalty. It was supposed to be a modern fairy tale, and for a while it was. But the moment things turned sour with the firm, Meghan was cast, fairly or not, as the villain of the royal narrative. Manipulative, controlling, calculated. The Yoko to Harry's Beatles. It was a character assassination in slow motion. And while a lot of that criticism is rooted in misogyny and racism, here's the uncomfortable truth. Meghan's actions haven't always helped her case. From alleged bullying claims to the Archetypes podcast that promised bold feminist insight and delivered famous friends chatting about labels, the follow-through often didn't match the hype. Add to that the legal threats, the constant media statements, and the carefully curated image, and suddenly Meghan feels less like a breath of fresh air and more like a highly engineered media machine. That's what makes sketches like the one on SNL land so effectively. They're not just targeting Harry. They're targeting the entire Sussex strategy, the brand, the machine, the endless narrative spin cycle that never seems to stop long enough for anyone to breathe. And then there sits the whole strip their titles debate. Once a fringe